everyone, happy Wednesday. Welcome to my kitchen. You can't really see it because it's kind of dark. Our book is a little bright, so I had to turn the brightness down today. I am excited to read to you Imaginary Friend. It is by Eoin Colfer. I apologize if that is not the correct pronunciation. It's spelled E-O-I-N. I'm assuming it's Ian. Please correct me if I'm wrong. So Eoin Colfer and Oliver Jeffers. Shocking, Miss Lion picked a Oliver Jeffers book. Okay, this one's a little long, but if you stick to it, it's a really good one, so I highly recommend doing that. Okay. Headaches are a pain. A bee sting hurts even more. But there's one thing that's worse than getting stung on the head by a bee on a rainy day, and that is loneliness. Being alone is no fun. The first 5 minutes are okay, but it's downhill from there, and if you're alone, you're alone. It's not as if you can wish a friend to life. Usually, this is true. You can wish and wish until your hair stands on end, but no imaginary friend will appear. Unless the conditions are just right, and if you add a little electricity, or luck, or even magic. Then an imaginary friend might appear just when you need one. An imaginary friend like Fred. Fred floated like a feather in the wind until a lonely little child wished for him. Fred was always happy to be summoned, and he tried really hard to be the best imaginary friend that he could be. He dressed up, dressed down, played ball, became a ball, and did whatever else his real friend wanted him to do without once complaining. But no matter how hard Fred tried, the same thing happened every day. One day, his friend would find a real friend in the real world. A friend who did not have to be ignored when grown-ups were around. When this day came, as it always did, Fred would feel himself fade. Usually, by lunchtime on the second day, Fred would be mostly invisible, and by bedtime on the fourth day, there would be barely a scrap of Fred left, just enough for the wind to catch and whisk him into the sky, where Fred would stay until someone wished for him. Fred was glad that his friends found other friends to play with, but sometimes he wished he had a friend that would need him forever. He dreamed of a friend who liked reading, music, and drama like he did. He imagined them sitting together, reading adventure stories and looking for shapes in the clouds. That was Fred's dream. Oh, sorry guys, bear with me. This is a tricky page. And one day, a lonely boy called Sam wished hard for a friend. When the conditions were perfect, Fred appeared and soon realized that Sam was the friend he had been dreaming of. Fred never had so much fun. Sam loved to read just like Fred and was most upset if he didn't get through at least one book a day. When they weren't reading, Sam and Fred would try to understand how the toilet worked. They'd listen to music on Sam's dad's sound system, which had 13 speakers. Or they would write plays and act them out for Sam's parents. Do you think it's easy for an imaginary friend to act out some things in front of parents? What do you think? But even though every morning brought new delights, Fred couldn't help thinking that every evening brought them closer to the day when Sam wouldn't need him anymore. And that would be the saddest day of his imaginary life. So Fred decided he would enjoy every single moment with Sam until that time came. It says, Dramatic Duo World Headquarters. The two friends pretended to be French and studied mime. They made Japanese masks, practiced their classical instruments, and planned their own comic book. They called themselves the Dramatic Duo. But one day, Sam came home late from a party and Fred felt nervous. felt a nervous flutter in his imaginary tummy. Was this the beginning of the end? Was he headed back into the sky? Fred checked his arm and thought that maybe he had faded a little already. When Sam came home, he had an excited look in his eyes, a look Fred had never seen before. I made a new friend, Sam told him. She's a girl called Sammy, which is funny because I'm called Sam. She loves to read and has written and illustrated her own comic book series. You're gonna love her, Fred. Fred thought he probably would love Sammy if he were able to stay around long enough to meet her. But don't worry, Sam said. Just because I met Sammy doesn't mean I don't need you. You're still my main man. In Fred's experience, there was only room in a heart. There was only room in a heart for one best friend. I will always be your friend, Fred said. Just promise that you won't forget me. I promise, said Sam, and he meant it. The next morning, Sam was gone when Fred woke up, and there was a note on his pillow. I am meeting Sammy to brainstorm our comic book. Back later, your pal, Sam. Comic book, thought Fred. That was our idea, me and Sam. Fred checked his arm again. Definite fading this time. When Sam came home several hours later, Fred called an emergency meeting of the dynamic duo. Okay, Sam, he said, I want to prepare you for what's coming. In a day or two, I will disappear. It's not your fault, it's just that now you have a real friend and you don't need me anymore. The best thing you can do is let me go without making a scene. Sam did make a scene. He swore he would never let Fred go. But the next day, Sam left the house early again to meet with Sammy, and Fred was left behind. I can see through my hand now, thought Fred, when Sam returned. When Sam returned home later that day, he brought Sammy with him. Sammy wore round glasses that made her eyes seem huge. She pulled the cello case behind her on a cart and carried an art bag so she could work on her comic book whenever an idea struck. Sam introduced them. Sammy, meet Fred. Fred, meet Sammy. This is a waste of time, thought Fred. Only people with imaginary friends can see an imaginary friend. But Sammy stuck her hand out in an exactly right direction as him and said, Pleased to meet you, Fred. Fred was surprised. He had never been visible to two people before. But he shook Sammy's hand. I know you're worried I don't need you anymore, said Sam, but you're wrong. I need you now more than ever. Why? Asked Fred. Why do you need me now? You've got Sammy. 2 reasons, said Sam. First, I never want to let you go. Fred thought he would cry, and that was only reason number 1. And reason 2, he asked. Tell him, said Sammy, elbowing Sam the way friends do. Okay, said Sam. Reason number 2 is that we need you to be in our quartet. Fred was confused. Quartet means 4. He said. There's only 3 of us. Aha, said Sam, like a great detective. That's where you're wrong. Yes, said Sammy, clapping her hands. You're wrong, because there are 4 of us. Sammy stepped to one side, and Fred saw a small girl with a violin case and a smile that made him want to smile too. This is Frida, said Sammy. Hi, Fred, said Frida, waving her hand. Sam's told us all about you. I hope that we can be friends. Sammy has an imaginary friend, Fred realized, and as he waved back, he noticed that his hand seemed absolutely solid, not see-through at all. Frida set her violin case on the floor and opened it. We need to practice, she said, or we'll never get to Carnegie Hall. Sammy rolled her eyes. Frida is so strict, she said to Fred, but you'll get used to it in a couple of years. Fred did get used to it. He quite enjoyed being told what to do by Frida with her dazzling smile. She says, "You're flat." The 4 friends spent all of their spare time together, having violin battles, reading comic books, practicing plumbing, pretending to be French, and arguing over what they would call their quartet. Les petits lapins, la grande quatre. I don't speak French, you guys, so I'm not going to read the other two. They eventually settled on the Quarreling Quartet, which they all agreed was the perfect name. The quartet made their debut at the school Christmas concert, much to the confusion of the audience. Why do you think the audience was confused, you guys? But then something interesting happened. The older they grew, the less time the four friends spent together. Sam and Sammy, it seemed, preferred graphic novels to music, and they left the quartet to concentrate on their comic book series. Carnegie Hall was eventually played, not as a quartet, however, but as a duo. Again, much to the confusion of the audience. And this, dear friends, is the interesting thing that happened. Even though they didn't see their human friends much anymore, Fred and Frida did not begin to fade, nor get swept into the sky like they had so many times before. Instead, they stuck around being imaginary friends to each other. They became quite famous in the imaginary community, and a statue was commissioned to be erected in the sky above their imaginary house. As this was the first case of its kind, imaginary scientists spent years trying to figure out how it had happened. Eventually, they concluded that friendship is friendship, imaginary or not. The same laws apply. The statue should have disappeared every time a gust of wind came along, but it never did. So the thing on the back also says, just because a friendship is imaginary doesn't mean that it's not real. So go out and play with your imaginary friends. There's nothing wrong with that, in my personal opinion. I hope you guys have a wonderful day, and I'll see you later.